I'm Glen Carabin, creator of Dartmouth, the comic book, and you're listening to the True North Country Comics Podcast.
Welcome to the True North Country Comics Podcast, dedicated to promote Canadian comic book and graphic novel creators and supporters. I'm John Swinimer. If you want to drop me a line, you can contact me at john@truenorthcountrycomics.com. On this episode, I chat with Glen Carabin about his comic book series, Dartmouth. This podcast is available on Apple Podcasts and Google Podcasts and YouTube. Please like and subscribe to that video channel. And if you want to help the site and the podcast, please consider supporting the effort by chipping in at ko-fi.com/True North Country Comics. Your patronage is greatly appreciated. Glen is a comic book creator working out of Eastern Passage, Nova Scotia. After writing a story inspired by the neighboring city of Dartmouth, but unable to find an artist to illustrate his book, Glen got creative and through employing a Canon Rebel T2i, Adobe Photoshop Elements, and Illustrator on a Mac Mini, with Blambot fonts created by award-winning comic book letterer and graphic designer Nick Picos, he developed a unique comic art style that resulted in the creation of Dartmouth, a supernatural superhero thriller. Dartmouth is a story about love, heartbreak, and overcoming fear, set in the context of evil lurking everywhere to take over the planet. So without further ado, here's my chat with Glen Carabin about his comic book series, Dartmouth. So Glen Carabin, thank you very much for taking time to chat with me.
Thank you for calling, John. Much appreciated. It's good to hear from you.
Yeah, good to hear from you too. Last time we met up was DCAF, I think 2022. So it was about a year ago or so. So there you go.
It was at DCAF 2022. That was actually my first comic convention ever. And, seeing your podcast around the internet and through Sequential Magazine, I was a little bit starstruck when I saw you come to the table. It was really nice to see you. And I really appreciated you stopping to talk to me for a couple of minutes. And sure. A lot has happened in the last year.
I bet. Well, we'll get right to it. But before we get to all the questions, I want to ask you, what was the first comic book that you read?
That was a long time ago. Mm-hmm. In the 80s, it was around the time Batman Death in the Family was very popular. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was. But that wasn't the first one I read. I'd have to say the first comic that I read was probably a Spider-Man, a Todd McFarlane Spider-Man. Mm-hmm. Yep. Amazing Spider-Man. Yeah, that's what really got us into comics back then was Death in the Family, the death of Robin. Everybody was talking about it, and it got us into comics. We knew who Batman was, from the television shows and so on. But once that was in the news and everybody was talking about it, we all had those like 6th and 7th print of the Death in the Family. Yeah. That was going around. And I have to say though, it was probably Todd McFarlane's Spider-Man. Amazing Spider-Man was the first ones that I actually read myself. Sure. Yeah, good Canadian fellow there, that's for sure. So good stuff growing up, but I wondered who or what inspires you to create today? Today, there's a lot of great artists and writers out there. And the internet, of course, has introduced me to a lot of them. And so I'll kind of separate it into writers and artists. So what really got me back into comic books was I was in my 40s, and it was kind of around the end of the DC New 52 series, and I picked up a couple of those Batman graphic novels. So Scott Snyder, Greg Capullo is the artist on those books. Of course, everybody's familiar with them. I picked up The Court of Owls, and I was back into comic books, right? I was digging up I had a little shoebox full of some old books, some old Todd McFarlane Spider-Mans. I had some Frank Miller Batman comic books stashed away. So they all came out, and it was, like I said, it was around the end of the New 52 and Rebirth. DC Rebirth was coming around. Mm-hmm. So I was totally on board for DC Rebirth. And of course, Tom King's Batman series was a great one. Josh Williamson's Flash series was a great one. that all led me to the Watchmen. I had known what the Watchmen were. I was familiar with the Happy Face back in the 80s, but I didn't really read any Watchmen comics. I didn't have access to them. But it was the Rebirth series that introduced me to the Watchmen. So I'm reading some Alan Moore comic books, and that got me into his Swamp Thing comic books. And as I'm visiting comic book stores, I start. What are some other writers that I'm really into right now? Oh, I loved, for example, the Grant Morrison Green Lantern run. So it was the Grant Morrison name was what made me pick up that Green Lantern run, but the art. His name is escaping me right. Liam Sharp. Right. Liam Sharp is the artist on that book, and Liam Sharp's art in Green Lantern, the Green Lantern series there, that was really freeing for me as an artist. It made me look at comic book art in a completely different way, totally outside the lines and the panels. So that his art in that Green Lantern book was a big influence on the way I approached my art in Dartmouth comic books. So that there are definitely some current influences that are off the top of my head currently. I'm reading. What did I recently pick up? Oh, it's the art in it is fantastic by Jason Fabok, The Three Jokers. I really love that. I picked it up a while ago, but as we all have stacks of comic books on our reading tables, right?
Yes.
I'm getting around to it. Yeah, and the art in that is fantastic. Yeah.
Oh, sure. Yeah, lots of good stuff there. My goodness. I mean, 52 wasn't for me. It was for a younger age group. But if anything came out of that, it was the fact that it introduced you to characters or situations from the past that made you go back. Like, that's curious that you went back and read the Alan Moore stuff after being introduced to the whole storyline of the Watchmen. So that's pretty curious. Good that it worked out. That's for sure. So, but talking about your books. Let's talk about Dartmouth, what it's all about. Maybe for those who aren't familiar with the series, how would you describe the story?
Oh, the story of Dartmouth is fundamentally a story about love, and heartbreak, and overcoming fears of that we're presented with in terms of relationships that we have, and so that's kind of like the ground level story, really. And then there's of course a bigger story, a bigger theme to the Dartmouth book, where of course the world is being taken over by things under the cover of darkness and shade, and I would say evil, to put it in blunt and clear words. Evil is kind of right around the corner lurking, and evil has come to the planet. And another theme in it is also of what happens if you cut corners and you don't put the work into something that you are focused on doing. If you try to take a shortcut to get it done, how you're doomed to fail. And that's kind of the character of the evil guy. He's of course very powerful, but his flaw or his hubris is that he's so powerful he takes it for granted, and he's really lazy. So to repay some of the problems that he's caused on his home planet because of his laziness and his cutting corners, he's sent to Earth to get Earth back on track to producing energy for this alien race. And he comes to Earth to take over the planet because the planet's gotten off track, and he's wondering what's wrong with this planet. Like every other planet that we have working for us to produce energy is going fine. What's happening on this planet Earth? So he's sent to Earth, and of course, it's love that's on planet Earth that's causing all the problems for him.
Okay.
So he arrives on planet Earth. He starts to cut corners immediately, falls back into his own ways. And all of a sudden, in trying to get other people to do his dirty work for him, he makes a mistake. And that mistake, combined with the terrestrial power of love, comes Dartmouth, and now
Ah.
Dartmouth is right. He's now kind of cursed, if you will. He's a ghost, right? He's from beyond, and he's cursed with superpowers. And he's kind of, the story is him kind of coming to terms with his superpowers and what he needs to do with them, why he has them, how he's going to use them, what's even going on, why am I even a ghost, and also dealing with the relationship with his wife, who is of course grieving and at a loss because her husband, is now a ghost, and to her doesn't exist anymore. But throughout the course of the story, with this evil planetary takeover in the background, we have these two kind of lovers coming to terms with what's going on and moving forward to try to fix the issues that the planet's having at the moment.
My goodness, that's a lot of stuff going on there, I tell you. A lot of stuff.
There is. And I'm trying to condense it down to 3 issues.
Sure, there you go. Well, what inspired you to create this series? Is there anything true to life? Are there any stories that sort of inspired you to make your own comic book like this?
So huge influences locally. Of course, I live in Dartmouth, Nova Scotia, and I see street signs and every day going to work. And if you kind of lay Gotham City over Halifax, Dartmouth, they map onto one another really well. So if you're looking at Gotham City and you look at Halifax as Gotham City, if you map them over each other, across the bridge of Gotham City, you go across Gotham River there, and you land in a town called Burnside, where of course Batgirl is watching over Burnside. And it's likewise here. You cross the bridge from Halifax over to the Dartmouth side, and you land in a little town called Burnside. And just up the way of the harbor, we have our power plant, the Tufts Cove Power Plant, and that maps almost exactly onto Gotham Light and Power, their power facility. So I have this town Dartmouth, and this sign saying Dartmouth, and I have reading all these Batman comic books and DC comic books, and then I'm seeing maps of Gotham, and I'm thinking this is very similar to Halifax, and of course Burnside, and it got to itching me. It got an itch, or it lit a little fire, if you will. And I was playing around with my phone one night, and an app on my iPhone, and came up with this character called Dartmouth. And I used a couple of darts to make his mouth.
Okay.
Self-explanatory.
Sure.
And dart boards for eyes, and darts for hands. So he has darts for hands and darts for mouth. And that's another little theme that's going on in the background of the comic book. Another influence is the Cupid mythology, where Cupid would have darts arrows to cause people to fall in love. So that's a good side of the superpower, and also darts to make people kind of, dislike each other or hate each other. So Dartmouth does have his 2 superpowers. His hands have the power of love in them. And if he wants to, take a bite out of somebody, his teeth have that power to turn people against one another.
Very interesting. Now, you mentioned you touched on some of the interesting aspects of your artwork and the character of darts, but your artwork itself is very unique. And I wonder if you could talk a wee bit about the tools you use to create your very unique style.
Certainly. I had this concept for Dartmouth since 2018 is when I made this character up. So I'm visiting the comic shops, picking up DC Rebirth comics and starting to get into some of the older stuff and discovering new artists and new writers that I've never heard of before that I fell in love with. And while I'm doing that, I'm kind of mentioning out loud to people that I have this little character and it would be cool if I had an artist. I kind of have a little story. And the feedback I got was like, artists aren't really going to kind of do your comic book for you. So like I said, I had made this little character on my phone, and at the comic book shop one day, one of the workers there, the comic shop employee, said, "Why don't you just do that artwork that you're showing me? Why don't you kind of expand on that and just put the effort into it and get that done?" And so I thought, yeah, okay. So I learned how to use Photoshop and Illustrator, and I actually all of my images are made with photographs. So
Hmm.
I go out locally around the town of Dartmouth and Halifax, and I take shots of the bridge and the cemeteries and um, some lighthouses and the cityscape and all that kind of stuff. And then I upload them into Photoshop, and I color them, I trace over them, I kind of erase some things out of them, and take hundreds of photographs actually is what goes into making one of these comic books. And I was lucky enough to have some friends. One of the things that I came across difficulty with was people. So I was able to get scenery and Dartmouth out, but actual people and their faces that readers connect with, that was a problem. So I was lucky enough to have some friends volunteer, help me out, and they would model for me. So the images of people you see in there are actually real people. And of course, they said everything is okay. You can go ahead and use those images, and I check it out with everybody before I actually publish it and make sure that they are okay with their images and with the words that I used on the pages that they're on. I check all that out. So I had some success with issue 1, and it was nominated for a Sequential Magazine Award for lettering, of all things. Lettering plays
Congrats on that.
heavily. Thank you. It plays heavily into my books because where I lack in illustration skills, if you will, I make up for it with some lettering to kind of balance out pages, to add a little bit more art to it and a little bit more color. And that was just out of that was like kind of a defense mechanism to help me get the page looking good. But it ended up getting recognized. So that was kind of neat. A little, a side effect that I wasn't, an unexpected side effect was that I gained a little bit of skill in lettering. And so because of this first book being received as it was, other people around town started asking me to actually be in the comic book. So in issue 2, in issue 2, people are coming to me. People are emailing saying, "I'd love to be in your book. That's so cool. I would love to be a character in your book." And
Nice.
I ended up getting, I think, 3 additional models that of just local people that wanted to be in the book, and they ended up being awesome characters, and the pages ended up being really well. So
That's great.
that's a long way of answering your question. Of it's all the images in there, yes, are inspired by local stuff in Dartmouth, Nova Scotia. Some of it outside of Dartmouth, outside the city core. And when I need a shot of like the beach or a lighthouse or something, I'll go outside of the city. And some of the stories are, yes, some of the stories you'll see in there, like the windmills are a real part of the town. And of course the Tufts Cove power plant is an iconic part of the Halifax landscape. So, all of that stuff is in there. So, yes, definitely inspired by local culture and local scenery.
Oh, that's great. That's great. Reminds me a bit of, I don't know if you've followed the Hobtown Mystery Stories by Chris Burton and Alexander Forbes. They're local folks in Nova Scotia, and they actually also do drawings and recognizable scenery of Nova Scotia. So that's one thing that people can take away from your book is going, hey, I recognize that. Even if they're just visiting, I'm sure they'll be able to pick up on it. So that's great. Now, you publish these books on your own, correct?
Correct.
Yeah. So maybe as a self-publisher, do you have any helpful tips you could pass along to others who might want to get started on their own comic book? I
do. I can definitely share some tips. I learned a lot from having to do this all on my own. and I was kind of inspired to do this on my own. People said, go ahead, figure it out. And, they weren't being mean. They were just saying, you got something there and you can probably figure it out. And if you do it, you'll get a lot out of this. So, if you want to do a comic book, have a story, right? Have your story and believe in your story and allow that story to take you. guide you. There's one character that is in my book. His name is Bill Watts, and he ends up becoming a character called Electric Bill. And he was not even somebody that I was even imagining being in the book. I just needed a character to do a certain thing, a critical part of the story. And so I just made this guy to do this critical part of the story. And he ends up being one of the most interesting characters in the book. And because I did that, I have to continue writing for him because he did that. And I didn't even realize that was going to happen. But because he did this critical thing in the book, I have to keep writing for him. And he's one of the main characters and plays a huge role in the book. I did not even know this character was ever going to exist, but I let that story do that, and he's become one of the most important parts of the books, and I can't let him go. He needs to come alive, and he needs to be written. So that's not even me. That's that story doing that. So have your story, believe in it, and let it take you where it's going to go. That's, really important. Work with other people. Like, I'm still looking for artists, right? To find somebody to take this to the next step or to take this further. These books are, to me, are kind of like business cards. So that's another thing. Produce your art, produce your story, and share it around. Get it into people's hands is another important thing that I'm doing now. I'm having like a little success. I'm actually meeting people, but I'm still working on my own doing this. But I'm starting to meet people, and it's because of that book, and it's because I actually did the work, and I have something to show for it. My book ended up being 32 pages only because it's a hobby, right? It's another thing that I love to do. I don't do anything else. That's other than my work and my family, but my spare time, I love doing it. So it ends up being 32 pages. If people are so busy that they don't have the time to do that, that's understandable. Get a couple of pages down, get 4 pages, get 8 pages. So you have that business card that you can share with people, because you're going to end up, if you want to go on in the comic book industry, you have to work with other people. That's the way it's done. Artists and writers, letters, colorists, you got to work with a team. So that's another thing that I'm working on. That's another thing I would tell other people that I am working on. I think it's important. And then the other part was the technical part of it, figuring out, computer programs, Illustrator, Photoshop. I was using little apps on my phone, but to bring it to where it's at now as a published book, I needed to learn those kind of industry tools, if you will. Mm-hmm. I know There's more out there, right? There's more, but these are 2 that I use and that I figured out and that get me where I need to go. So they're great. And then it's other things, technical things, is like the size of the comic book, know where the edges of a comic book kind of get cut off, the bleed space and the safe spaces for your art and for your letters and all that. That was all new to me. Color formats like RGB versus CYMK coloring is important for printing. I had no idea. I learned all that. Raster images versus vector images for printing. I had to learn all that stuff. I had no idea what all that was, but because I believed in my story, I couldn't help myself but research that stuff and learn how to do that. And so that's kind of just some of the basics that I've learned along the way, and that have stuck with me, and I'll carry with me.
That's tremendous. That's a lot of stuff, that's for sure. So you're out doing interviews such as this one here, but I'm wondering, how do you plan to promote your book? Will you be attending any conventions or festivals as well?
Absolutely. We just did a festival. Of course, we met at the DCAF last year. I met another great local artist who is, doing things beyond Halifax now, Andrew Clark. So I met him at DCAF last year, and he said, your book is good. Congratulations. It's good to see you here. Good to meet you. And it was great. It was, these are one of the people that I met, the connections that I've made in the comic book industry. And he said, apply to the East Coast Comic Expo in Moncton. You apply to it. You get, I guess, you have a chance. He didn't say you have a chance, but he said apply for it. So I applied for it. So that was the real first, beyond DCAF, which is my first comic convention. I went to outside. It was my first one kind of on the road. So we just went to the Moncton East Coast Comic Convention, or Expo, sorry. That was awesome. Again, met people. Yeah, shared my book around, and so we just did that. And then coming up, there's the decaf. Just got accepted to decaf
Congrats.
2023.
That's great.
Thank you very much. Look, I can't wait to get to that and see everybody there again. And that's August 13th at Alderney Landing in Dartmouth, of course, and that's sponsored or organized by the good folks at Strange Adventures Comic Book Shop here in Halifax.
Good folks
Dartmouth.
there. Absolutely.
Good, fantastic, best comic book store out there. And now another one of the other best comic book stores out there have invited me to do a signing.
Nice.
On my very first kind of in comic book shop signing is going to be at Giant Robot Comics. That's in Dartmouth. It's Dartmouth's kind of local comic book shop, and we're doing that on Saturday, July 29th. And also traveling to Cape Breton to the local NPC. That's a comic book shop in Cape Breton. I'm going to drop a couple of books off there. So there are some things coming up. Also, I'd like to mention the Monster Comic Book Lounge and Cape and Cal Comics, also in Halifax and Sackville. They too are great supporters of Dartmouth, and are more than happy to take a couple of copies and sell them. So just want to thank them too. And while I don't have any signings, I'll certainly be visiting their shops too over the next couple of months.
Yeah, we've got to go to those stores and keep them going in this day and age where fewer and fewer independents are around. So that's always a good thing.
If you have any spare time and you're not creating comic books, go to those comic books.
Absolutely.
Best thing to do with your spare time.
Yeah, wise words for sure. Now, we've been talking about this series. Issue 2 is about to come out or is coming out, and is that planned to continue?
Issue 2 is out, so this is what I'm doing now. This is what I took. I had it published. I printed it. I had it printed for the East Coast Comic Expo in Moncton. That was kind of like my deadline. I told Andrew, I said, "Yeah, man, I'll get it done. I'll see you there." And that's what kind of motivated me. And I got it published, printed for the East Coast Comic Expo in Moncton. That was the first place I was selling it. It's in all the local comic shops around Halifax. Like I said, I'm getting it to Cape Breton in a couple of days here. I'm going to drop it off at the local NPC comic book shop, and it's published. And this one too is kind of selling at the same pace as the first one, and it is the middle story. It picks up after the end of issue 1. At the end of issue 1, you're kind of left with some questions. What's going on here? What's happening? You're not quite clear. And that was done purposely because that's the way the lead character feels. The ghost, Dartmouth, Bernie. He feels he's kind of shaken up, like what's happening. So you're kind of left feeling the same way after the end of issue 1. It's a little bit, there's some, you play with time a little bit, and it's a little bit disjointed, but that's kind of purposely done. And then issue 2 picks up at the end of issue 1 and does a lot of exposition and explaining what happened in issue 1. And then it carries on in a more linear format to a cliffhanger at the end of issue 2. But all the pieces at the end of issue 2 set up the finale, which is going to take place in issue 3. I'm currently working on issue 3, and takes about 18 months to 20 months to do this with everything else going on. So end of 2024, 2025, it looks like when part 3 will be out. But yeah, fresh off the printer is number 2, and we have lots of copies of that out there right now.
Sounds good. I'm asking creators, and this is a question that's been going on for a while. In the last few months, it's really been hot and heavy, is the use of AI. And as it applies to comic book creation, I wanted to get your take on it. Do you think that AI is helpful or harmful to comic book creation?
That is a great question. I'll tell you my honest feeling. I was fearful that my art would be mistaken for AI because I am not a traditional illustrator. I don't use pencils. I use photographs, and I trace my models in Photoshop, and then I export it to Illustrator and do some work through Illustrator. So I was fearful that my art would be mistaken for AI, just because it looks a little bit different, I think, than regular comic book art. So that was my initial reaction to it. I haven't had any issues with people saying your art is AI, you shouldn't be selling it here. So I think I kind of cleared that hurdle. So that was my initial kind of response when AI became a big deal. I thought about, you know, how I thought about the good points and the bad points of it, and it's really simple for me. If you have an idea, a story, a great story, and you can't do the art for it, right? You can write your story and as honestly as possible, like write your own story. You could also get AI to write your story too, but let's say you just write your own story and you don't rely on AI to write your story. To kind of put images to your story, AI would be helpful. And maybe people could use that to kind of introduce their story to individuals. You might not want to say it's my comic book or go too far with it, but it could kind of get your idea across as like a sketch for it, and so you can like present it to other artists and say, hey, here's my story. AI did the art for it, but I just wanted to see what it would look like. So you could do sequential art with AI. You can, but the other thing is so that was one thing that I thought about it that would be a positive. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? I don't know. It could help you get a story done, but I wouldn't go too far with it, personally. And then I looked on the other side of it, and if you use AI like to write your story and to do the art for it, it takes away from, I find, your creativity. It takes away from one thing that I love is trusting my process when I do art. And when I say trust your process is that, yeah, you have your idea, but then when you create it yourself, it doesn't necessarily always turn out the way you expected it to. Sometimes it looks a lot different, and that's art, right? And that's real art. And sometimes it even turns out better. Even if you make a mistake, some of your mistakes end up being awesome. Like, and I had this conversation. I believe it was, a medical breakthrough with insulin. I think insulin was used was they were looking for something else, some other kind of medical, some other kind of medicine, and then insulin was kind of discovered along the way of looking for this other kind of medicine. So they were going through the process, and this other great thing turned up. And I think that's the same way with art too. When you are doing your own art, you learn things, new, better things get created, things that you would never expect to come out of your art. That happens when you put that effort into yourself. So by doing AI, you're kind of depriving yourself of those potentials. What kind of lies beneath the surface of your art will never come to life if you use AI. But if you do the work yourself, you'll make those mistakes, and you'll learn, you'll correct them, and you'll even see better things that you can use for your next page, right? If you're doing your own art, trying to do one page, you might make a completely different page, and then you go back to do the page that you were first working on, and by the end of it, you have two. So you learn those things by doing the work yourself.
Very good. Yeah.
And one final thing on that is, when you don't rely on AI, and you do the work yourself, there's that sense of satisfaction that you get from putting that hard work in, and you just feel a lot better about your comic book in the end when you know that it's yours. And so that's I like putting the effort in. There's something to say about that, and you learn a lot along the way, especially from mistakes. And then on top of that, I heard there's lawsuits because AI it uses other people's art to create. So for that reason, stay away from it.
Right, exactly. Well, lots of good stuff there. That's for sure. So, wanted to know from you, where do you recommend people go online to find out about your current and your future projects?
I appreciate that, John. I have really three websites that people can go to. I have my Instagram account at Glen Carabin, Instagram at Glen Carabin. I post like little art stuff that every once in a while, kind of just things that I can put up quick, little images of the book and progress put up sometimes, and also to promote my book. So you'll see a lot of stuff on Instagram. To purchase the book, it's Glen Carabin at Square. So the Square website is where I have my books for sale, and you can go there, and I'll ship them out to anybody who places an order through Glen Carabin at Square. And I also have a Substack that I don't keep up to date as much as I should, but I do keep it up to date periodically. And it's just kind of like a blog of my experience writing and, making my way and learning about the comic book industry. And that's Glen Carabin at Substack.
Thanks to Glen for the chat. You can discover more about Glen at glencarabin.substack.com and on Instagram at Glen_Carabin. Thanks to you for listening to the True North Country Comics podcast. If you haven't done so already, please subscribe to and like this podcast on Apple Podcasts. And please check out the TrueNorthCountryComics.com website. True North Country Comics is now on YouTube. Please like and subscribe to that video channel and hit the notification button. Please follow True North Country Comics on most social media sites. And please send your feedback to John at TrueNorthCountryComics.com. If you want to help the site and the podcast, please consider supporting the effort by chipping in at ko-fi.com/TrueNorthCountryComics. Your patronage is greatly appreciated. Thanks for listening, and come back soon for another episode. Bye for now. True North Country Comics podcast is copyright True North Country Comics, copyright 2023.